Okay, rolling. 5, 4.
This is the video for Lesson 4, Section 3. Actually, for Section 3, there are two videos, and both of these relate to techniques discussed in the lesson, how to subdivide a cube and how to expand a cube. In Lesson 3, we discussed the importance of developing an ability to estimate a cube in perspective. In this lesson, we will demonstrate the importance with two actual demonstrations here. The first one, I'm going to lay out a stereo receiver from this front view, side view. And this drawing is in your textbook, so you can take a look at it, maybe even pull it out and follow along as I'm doing the drawing. But basically you can see some dimensions, and they're all marked as X's. 1x would be the height, 1x deep would be the depth of a cube, 1x wide would also be the depth of a cube. You can see overall that the stereo is 2 cubes deep, 1 cube high, 1.5 cubes deep in the side view. So let's lay this out. And the first thing I'm going to do to proportion this object is to start with a horizon line. Again, I'm going to use a Sharpie pen to lay this out, and I think that'll make it a little easier to see. So the horizon line and my left vanishing point and my right vanishing point. And because this object is generally viewed from a standing position, it's small enough that generally when I look at it I would be able to see the top surface. So I'm going to start my drawing with the front edge of my stereo. And this front edge actually can be a measuring line. In any 2-point perspective, there's always one vertical line that you can actually use as a measuring line. So I'm going to start this drawing by estimating a cube in perspective. And I will lay out this cube to the left and right vanishing points, then estimate a cube in perspective that looks like a cube on the right side and a cube on the left side. Now, using some of these tricks that we learned in the chapter, I can take 2 diagonals of the cube and determine the center point. Then by doing a vertical through the center and a horizontal through the center, I can now expand this cube in perspective. So taking the opposite corner, I want to expand it in this direction, taking the opposite corner through the midpoint and extending that up to my extension line, dropping it down, will duplicate that cube perfectly in perspective. And you'll see the front cube appears to be slightly wider than the rear cube. Again, linear perspective, things tend to get, verticals look closer together as they get closer to the vanishing point. The side cube, I will divide that in half the same way at a vertical and a horizontal. And now this drawing is, this view, the side view, is 1.5 cubes deep. So going from the midpoint, through the midpoint, up to the extension line, will divide this cube exactly by a half. So I now have my basic proportions of my stereo. Now let's add the detail. When I look at this stereo, I can see that there's a reveal, a little groove going right through the center. And I can lay that in. Both the front and the side. I'll show there is a little depth to that reveal. And now the top, there is a display window, and I can see that display window is 1/4 of a cube high. It's 1/8 of a cube from the top, 1/8 of a cube up from the reveal. So it divides this top space into 4, and I can use this measuring line. I could scale it, or I can just use my eye. There's about the middle point between the center of my original cube and the top, and half of that and half of this results in 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, and 1/4 of the top space, or 1/8 of the original cube. Now let's draw the window for my stereo. And that window is also 1/8 of a cube back, and I could just see a little square right here, so I'm just going to estimate the window opening about here. And then it's 1/4 of a cube back in this rear cube, 1/4 back, so if I divide this in half. Now I know this seems like a lot of geometry, but actually you can see that I'm doing this pretty quickly. So I can identify where the cube stops. Down below there's a little DVD drawer, about 1/8 down and 1/8 thick. So if I find the middle point of this line between here and here, middle point, middle of there, middle of that, each one of these little dots represents approximately 1/8 of the original cube. I can draw the DVD opening and relate it as it does in this drawing. It's directly below the display window on the receiver. Drop that down here and here. And then there is a row of buttons, and I will lay out those buttons on the drawing, and they are spaced. And now I am just estimating those spaces. I could subdivide, and keep subdividing, but it gets to a point where it just gets a little silly. So rely more on your sense of scale. Here's the logo for the front, and right down the middle of this DVD opening are going to be some little LEDs on top through the middle. And then there is 1/4 of a cube back. There's going to be a control knob. The minor axis of that ellipse is coming from the left vanishing point. The ellipse, as we learned in lesson 3, major axis is at a right angle. And now I can sketch in the ellipse, and I want to add a little bit of depth to it. It's a 3-dimensional cylindrical knob. I'll show a little space, and maybe we can even put in a little knurling or texture on the knob. There's the knob, and there's a couple LEDs. I will drop those down to the LEDs directly below it on the DVD opening, and I'll just put in a few more of them. Now the louvers start 1/2 of a cube back. They're going to start right here. They're going to relate directly to the size of the display window on the front, and they will go 1/4 back. And I can now lay in these louvers. Rough them out, and there is a group of louvers directly below it. All from the vanishing point. Let's put in just a little bit more definition. This component stereo system, you can see, looking at the drawing, has got feet underneath and lifts that whole component stereo slightly off the ground. They're far enough back that I probably wouldn't be able to see them. So I'm just going to indicate a little shadow on the ground to suggest that this stereo system is floating slightly off the ground. I'll put in just a little bit of depth to the display opening and a little bit of depth on the buttons on the front. And then if I take a marker, I'll just darken in the shadow on the ground. I'll darken in the display window opening. And I'll add just a little bit of gray to the louver openings. Now this will be an in-class assignment, and students generally take about a half an hour to lay this out completely. And if they finish sooner than a half an hour, then I ask them to render it in grayscale, but it's not a requirement to render this whole thing. So there's a front bezel on it, and I'm just kind of estimating that right now. And that front bezel will have a little bit of a recess right by that groove. And then to define the shape a little bit better, I think I'll just take my marker and add a little vignette to the back. And this will complete the demonstration. Yeah, let's put one more little line in here just to darken up the center line a little bit. And that's it. That's the layout process. What we're using are starting by estimating the cube, and then using our proportioning methodologies that we learned about in this chapter. The idea of a diagonal can be used to expand a cube, and it can be used to subdivide a cube. And that's exactly the methodologies we've used in this demonstration. The next demonstration, we're going to do a full rendering, and that'll be of a urban commuter vehicle, train. That completes this.